உலகெங்கும் தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.
Welcome to CrossRoads on TVI. I'm Parthi Kandavil. This week saw a flurry of activity with the Commonwealth meeting in Sri Lanka. However, our focus on today's show will not be on Prime Ministers going or not going to Sri Lanka, but with ordinary Tamil youth in the diaspora who've gone back and connected with their ancestry, homeland, and people. We're joined in the studio with two sisters, Darsha and Vinosha Jagadiswaran, who've recently traveled this past summer, and the previous summer actually, and spent time in Sri Lanka. During this time, and in the coming months, many of us begin to think and plan for traveling in next year's spring and summer. Hopefully our guests' experiences will encourage travel back home and our reconnection with our past and identity. Also, Darsha helped author a report, an upcoming report by the Center for Policy Alternatives that will come out shortly and address some of the land issues, the serious land issues facing Tamils back home. She will share her findings with us. In our last segment, we'll be speaking with members of the Tamil Health Association who have recently started a savvy marketing campaign to encourage prostate cancer awareness in the month of November, or rather, Movember. As always, we welcome your participation in our show. Please call us anytime during the show at 416-623-8100. Welcome, Vinosha and Darsha.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for making time to come on and sharing your experiences. So I guess the first question is why? Why did you guys travel back home, I guess, last summer and this summer as well?
When we went last summer, it was the first time we had ever gone back to Sri Lanka. Both of us grew up with parents who were very sort of vocal about their experiences in Sri Lanka, and with grandparents as well who would tell us stories. So I think that from a young age, and I can speak to sort of my personal experience, and my sister has a slightly different reason, but from a young age I always knew that I eventually wanted to work on issues in Sri Lanka, whether that was human rights or advocacy or development. And so after I graduated, finished my first degree, I had a year off before I was going to start law school, and I figured I would take that time to save up a bit of money and then go back to Sri Lanka and connect with some of the grassroots organizations that we don't really hear about from Canada, to see the kind of meaningful development work that people on the ground there are doing, and then hopefully also get sort of more connection to the country that my parents grew up in and it meant so much to them that I had never been to before.
For me, I've been involved with Engineers Without Borders for the past 3 years of my university career, and I've been working towards having an internship overseas in Africa, and that kind of has always been a dream of mine to go overseas somewhere and witness a different experience in the community and the culture. And I realized as the opportunity came up, and my sister mentioned that her and my cousin were planning a trip to go overseas, and I realized, well, why go somewhere else when I can go connect with my roots? And I think for me, it was interesting because having this place where we came from but never seeing it or never understanding this such important part of who I am and my identity, but never actually going there and seeing what the land was like, what the people were like in the community and the culture, and never experiencing that. I think an important part of me kind of felt like it was missing, and my roots, I hadn't really planted them and discovered them, so it was a great opportunity for me to build upon who I was and discover that part of me, I think.
And what was the nature of your work? Like, I understand you spent 2 summers there, or at least Darsha did. What was the nature of the work you did?
So the first summer we were there, the way we designed the trip was we'd contacted a few orphanages and charities beforehand from Canada that we had had friends go to, just to sort of set up visits with them and see if we could conduct a few programs. We also had the fortunate opportunity to work with Visions Global Empowerment, which is an American-based charity that also has a presence in Canada, and they work on education in the North and East. And so we had the opportunity to go to Batticaloa in that first trip and work with English teachers there. But generally, sort of, we had started this blog and cheesily called it Finding the Mango Trees, because the way we saw it is we were going to find the organizations in the North and East that helped sort of shelter local populations and empower local populations. We're both really big believers in local empowerment as opposed to sort of Western imposition of ideas and development. And so that's what we really were going to do. And then this past summer, I also had gone back on a legal internship, having finished my first year of law school.
If anything, I think my time with Engineers Without Borders has taught me that going in with this mindset that you know best and you can help in this kind of volunteerism sort of idea, it's interesting. So I think the way this trip was different is we knew that we were going to gain so much more than we could give, and it was kind of an exploratory mission. Our first time going to Sri Lanka, we wanted to see what organizations were doing on the ground and what amazing initiatives, as we discovered, were on the ground. And they shared with us so much more than we thought, and the creativity, the innovation, and the intelligence that exists in these small organizations that are kind of undiscovered on a national scale.
Vinosha, you brought up a really, what I feel is a very good point, that a lot of our youth, not only Tamil youth in Toronto, but also in the UK, I've noticed, very anecdotally, going to Africa. It seems to be a very big destination to do,
very romanticized,
volunteerism. Yes, and in contrast to that, not to discredit that,
of course,
that sense of volunteer work and the work connected to that. But what were the greater value you found working with children and youth of your own ancestry? How was that connection?
Well, I think one thing that's important is there's a new concept coming forth which is called experiential learning and community-based learning. And I think in those concepts it's very different from volunteerism because you're going in with the mindset that you don't have any biases or any information that that you have that is superior to what you're going to gain. So it's going with an open mind. And then also experiential learning, it's being able to relate to someone on a different level. So I understand the need to go overseas because it's hard to relate to something that you haven't seen or experienced yourself. So experiential learning is very valuable, and going overseas has its value in that.
How about, in terms of like working with children who are of the same background and language, culture, did you find the experience meaningful and profound in any way?
It was interesting because we have a commonality and also such a difference at the same time. So we have this connection in our ancestry and finding those connections and both realizing that we could have had the same life or we could have had a different life, but just because I was born in Canada and they were born in Sri Lanka, the experiences are totally different. And Darsha can probably speak to this as well. And looking at the children and the way they were growing up in terms of just the way we grew up here in Canada and our values and our freedoms a little bit as well. And the education system is very different as well. But I think also there are some things that the values in Sri Lanka that I would want to apply more in my life that aren't necessarily coming up here in Canada as well.
That's interesting. And Darsha, I was wondering if you could reflect on that same kind of idea. Similarly, I went back to Sri Lanka for the first time in my life in 2009 following the war. And, similarly, I had a close cousin who's my age, and the difference in our lives, I could have very easily been him had my parents stayed and his parents left.
Exactly.
How did you find that dynamic?
So, we have extended family in the north, in Jaffna, and we had the opportunity, so I guess I had the opportunity twice to be able to go back and spend time with them, and we found that we had developed these really great connections with their children, as well as the parents, and my grandmother's sister, who we got to see before she passed away, unfortunately, this year. And so I think that for us was a really great experience. But for me, I think what struck me is that we had, so I guess my parents' first cousin or second cousin, whose kids were around the same age as we were, but in completely different circumstances. So one of his daughters was being pulled out of school after O-levels as a result of safety concerns with her traveling to school. And I think that for us, we were very sort of confused by that, and we spent a lot of time trying to convince him, don't do it, education is important. But I think that we're seeing sort of post 2009 a shifting in values and a shifting in social structures, and I think that really came through in that interaction. And I just wanted to comment just briefly on something Vinosha said. In terms of connecting with the children of your own ancestry, something that I think was really powerful that we experienced was having we met a lot of young girls through orphanages and charities and through schools we visited. And these young girls were so amazed at the fact that we were Tamil and we were young women who were accomplishing great things sort of in Canada, in a different country. And I think for them, being able to see those kinds of role models that they may not get the experience to see, and we're talking about children who are very poor, sometimes orphaned, but don't have the access to the kinds of role models that we take for granted in Canada. And I think for them, and also sort of seeing their reaction to us, I think it was like really, really great.
You know, Vinosha mentioned, you know, the idea that she gained as well from the experience. I mean, a lot of us kind of mistakenly think that we're giving, right, by going
Right.
and volunteering. What dynamic similar, if at all, did you feel you grew from that experience of whether it was with your family or with the young girls that you worked with?
So for me, going in, I think I went to Sri Lanka with a lot of preconceived notions, with ideas of whether it was development or politics. I just went in with a lot of preconceived notions. And so spending time there, I think, really opened my eyes to the actual ground realities of the situation there and the nuances. Sri Lanka has obviously a very contentious history, but very complex and complicated problems right now. And being able to understand those nuances by speaking to people on the ground and like learning of their life stories and their experiences. Like we had this amazing opportunity at the end of our trip where we had met sort of a local politician who was from Kilinochny, and he invited us to come to a war widow gathering. So we went, and it was about 30 war widows and their children, and they were receiving bicycles from a foundation that had decided to donate. But what struck us was what he wanted us to do was really capture their stories. So we sort of set up, and we were very uncomfortable taking video and camera footage of anybody, but he had asked us to do it. And so we'd videotape these women, and you know, one by one, and men, there were a few men as well. And one by one they would come up and they would tell us the awful stories of how, you know, they experienced sort of the end of the war and their life now. Like there's this joke, and I know I'm going a little off topic, but there's this joke that is sort of circulating in Jaffna saying that it's easy to come back to Sri Lanka, drive down the A9, go to your village and see nothing, and then come back up the A9 and come back to Canada and say everything is great and you know, we're fine. I think the value and the real sort of education you get going, especially for the youth who have never been before, who may not have that connection, is that you go down the A9 and you go 3 kilometers off of it and you see women and men living in like tin shanty houses who can't afford the monthly 15 rupee charge to send their children to school. 15 rupees is not even a dime here. It's pocket change. It's not like it's stuff you find on the road. And I think for us, seeing that and really understanding the depth of the like despair and sort of the complexity of the issues is an educational experience. We learned far more than we were able to give in that first trip. So
I think that's an excellent point that you make. A lot of the diaspora go and, you know, they do that trip. They take the van or the car up the A9 and they don't visit or the Vani, which, you know, for the most part has been significantly affected in comparison to Jaffna, right? In terms of your, I guess, understanding your history, and did you feel any sort of connection to your family members in terms of the second generation? Because inevitably there'll be a time when we become, you know, adults, or where some of us already are, and, you know, and our children may or may not have that connection. And how do you see that going in terms of 20 years from now?
I think that's a hard question. I mean, I don't know if you want to tackle it first.
I think it's interesting because at first I was a bit hesitant because there's a bit of a language barrier between us and the family that we encountered, in that I am next to not at all fluent in Tamil at all spoken. And so we do have a better understanding of Tamil. So in terms of communicating, it was hard, and it got frustrating at times in that the stories that we were hearing, these people were so vulnerable to share stories, and it was the same thing with the family. We were so excited to hear their stories and their experiences and connect after so long, or after never even knowing these family members, but that communication barrier sometimes got in the way, and it was frustrating. But I realized over the days is little things like giggling about like us trying to ride a bike down a street in Jaffna, a rusty old bike, and thinking that we actually forgot how to ride a bike in Jaffna, and starting to develop like a rapport with our cousins, which is very similar to what I had here and kind of my cousins. It makes you a little bit nostalgic in that, like, I see the relationship that could have been and that I could have had with these people. And at the end of the day, family, even though you may not have connected with them at all up until this point, there is something special about that connection. I feel like that's something that stays with you there's a lot of facts and figures and numbers that you're going to encounter in Sri Lanka, but these experiences where you connect with someone on a different level, whether it be a family member or someone at an orphanage who shares an experience with you, and there's a moment of emotion, I think that sticks with you, and that's kind of what carries you forward in any type of work or advocacy you want to do in Sri Lanka.
It's a very similar experience to mine. In 2009, 2011, my family house, didn't really think of it or even know of it until that trip, but feeling a weird and profound sense. Darsha, what are your thoughts what are the challenges from our generation and our children's generation to having a connection with back home?
I honestly think a lot of it comes down to putting the effort into maintaining that relationship. I'm sure as with your family, like our grandparents and my parents make the time to make those phone calls every month, every week, and maintain that connection. But I think that it's hard because a lot of us now in the diaspora have such busy lives and tend to neglect those kinds of things, like maintaining those long distance relationships with family. So I think that as applicable as that is to Sri Lanka, it's also applicable to family anywhere else in the world, but especially to Sri Lanka because not many of us have taken that trip and have had that opportunity to meet family. In my second trip there, I had the opportunity so my grandmother's sister lives in Jaffna, and we had gone to see her when we were there, and that was incredible. And then when I went back, I had gone up and seen her once, and a week later she had passed away, and so I was there for the funeral. And I think that we had developed such a close connection in that short period of time. So for me, that was extremely emotional, and also, on the other hand, a really good opportunity to really connect with my cousins. While I was there for the funeral, we were actually able to get past some of the cultural and language barriers that exist. I think it's completely possible. I really think it's about putting in that additional effort because if you don't maintain that connection, it's almost like you lose a part of your roots. And it's also a lot of the times the family members you have that are left in the north and east or even in Colombo look forward to having that communication outside. The truth is, since so many of us have emigrated, a lot of family, there aren't the strong family networks that used to exist, and those networks actually exist outside of the country. So you want to allow, the cousins and family you have in the country to have access to those networks so they don't feel isolated.
I think that's an excellent point, is that the reality is many of our families are actually outside of Jaffna, so their little connection is very meaningful and more so. It's time for a short break, dear viewers. Please join our conversation following these short notes. Welcome back to CrossRoads on TVI. I'm joined in the studio with Vinosha and Darsha Jagadiswaran. Vinosha is a fifth-year student in Human Kinetics at University of Guelph. Darsha is a law student at the University of Toronto Law School. Darsha, I was curious to the work you've been doing with the Center for Policy Alternatives, in that a lot of the youth who've gone back to Sri Lanka have done stuff at a very grassroots level in terms of working with education or orphanages. The work you've done is more higher level in terms of arguing or making the presentation of the ground realities at a theoretical level or a policy level. Tell us of the paper that you're working on that's coming out shortly and the work you've done.
Yeah, so I had the incredible opportunity to go to CPA on an internship, and it was by far one of the best experiences in my life. I got to meet a ton of incredible lawyers and advocates in the organization. It's a really great organization for anyone who's thinking about going back and doing some of that legal sort of research advocacy work. It's based in Colombo, but a lot of their work focuses on war-affected communities. And so while I was there, one of the main things that I was working on was co-authoring a policy brief with Bhavani Fonseca, who is one of the senior researchers at CPA, who's currently at Harvard. And so both of us were looking at land acquisitions. As I'm sure you've heard, this is a really big issue in Sri Lanka. Land generally has always been a contentious issue, but sort of since 2009 and the end of the war, land acquisitions have become kind of come into the public spotlight, in large part because of some of the scale of land acquisitions and how they've just been scaled up. And it seems like the government is using the powers that they have under the Land Acquisition Act, and instead of using them to resolve ethnic communal differences or resolve some of the long-standing issues in the North and East, they're actually abusing those powers and using them in an arbitrary way. And I think two of the themes that like really came up in the work was the idea of militarization and centralization. So the military has a huge role in these land acquisitions, and I mean, land traditionally is something that should be taken care of by the civil administration. But we're seeing with, for example, the acquisition in Jaffna, where the government is attempting to take approximately 6,380 acres of land that covers a huge swath from like Balikam, Daliple, including a huge area of land that used to be a high security zone. And in that process, we're seeing that the government is sort of disregarding law. The military has a huge role in that acquisition. For example, before I got to Sri Lanka, a few months before, CPA had sent field researchers up, and when they were attempting to visit the area, they saw that it was the military who was controlling that, and not even the local military. They had to call centralized military officials. And centralization is another issue. Like the Northern Provincial Council's elections just happened, and one of the big issues that's going to come up is the central government actually going to devolve power over land? One of the answers to those questions came through a judgment that was rendered about a month and a half ago now, where Mohan Peiris, who's the new sort of purported Chief Justice, said that the only power over land the Provincial Council has is where the central government has given them that land. And now there's lots of that's a contentious issue. A lot of people disagree and think that the way to read the 13th Amendment, which is the act that governs that, is not to say that the Provincial Council only has power over land that's given to them by the central government. And that's one of the things that we raise in the report as well. But we do sort of three case studies. We look at Jaffna, we look at Valioya, which used to be known as Manalaru, and Sampur in the east. And so it was interesting work for me. Like it's very technically written. Like we're definitely looking at the law, because the truth is there is a legal framework, and the case law is actually not that bad. Like it goes towards, in the 90s there were a lot of cases rendered that really said the government can only take land where there's a true public purpose and where the local community won't be sort of badly affected, and that the government can't abuse its power.
Yeah, but it goes without saying, like the law, there isn't a respect for the law in Sri Lanka. I mean, with the sacking of the Chief Justice, I think a year ago, given that, is there any recourse for individuals in Sri Lanka, or some of us in the diaspora who have concerns about land, to redress those and to secure existing land?
So I think that, we're seeing some cases go forward now. Like there's about, I'm not sure the exact number, but over 2,000 petitioners who have filed a case at the Sri Lankan Court of Appeal arguing that this acquisition that's happening in Jaffna is illegal. There's also another group who have filed with the Sri Lankan Supreme Court under what's called a fundamental rights petition, and they're also saying that this acquisition is illegal. The outcomes of those cases, we'll see what happens. As you've said, the rule of law is definitely in question, and it's something I got to see visiting the courts there. But I think that it's important to do anyways, because you want to preserve these arguments for the record. In the foreseeable future, if something changes, you want to have that on the record. But I think that for the diaspora, and as well as people in Sri Lanka, the real sort of solution or potential solution is through advocacy. So we've seen the Northern Provincial Council, or the TNA, make really strong arguments against these acquisitions. And they're very much against sort of conducting these acquisitions without local consultation. Another sort of hopeful piece of news, I think, and I am a bit of an optimist, so I want to sort of look at this as a positive development, is India just passed a law at the end of September, which revolutionized their system of land acquisitions and basically made it mandatory that you had these social impact assessments conducted before the government could take land. So they would look at things like local effect, consulting. It was mandatory to consult local government, which I think is really important in the Sri Lankan context. So while it may not directly or in the foreseeable future have an effect, I think that the Sri Lankan judiciary has in the past turned to Indian law, and hopefully this is something that people can center advocacy around, because I do think that even though the legal framework is okay as it stands, and we do say in the report we wish that the government would at least adhere to that, it definitely requires massive reform.
As part of your work on the land issues, could you shed light to our viewers on the realities facing us in the diaspora who own land, passing it on to subsequent generations? I mean, to make it personal, am I entitled to own land in Sri Lanka, though I wasn't born there or obviously not lived there?
So I actually didn't look at that question specifically, and I don't want to answer it because I'm not 100% sure on it. I think my gut would say if you do currently own land in the north and east.
No, a parent.
Oh, like a parent. Yeah. So like
is that transferable?
I've heard anecdotally stories of people having issues with land that they own there if it's not being monitored or taken care of, just partly because of all of the sort of government action that's happening, but also because there are a lot of landless people in Sri Lanka and a lot of displaced persons. And so something that I became quite familiar with when I was there is the issue of internal displacement. There are still sort of hundreds and thousands of internal displaced persons. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that the diaspora isn't really acting on that issue. There's a ton of people who have been displaced from their homes or who were originally quite poor and don't have homes to go back to because they were either sort of on land permits or squatting on land, not necessarily having official title to land. We also saw through the conflict that there were sort of double land grants. I mean, I'm not describing this correctly, but because we had these sort of two governing forces in the north and east, you would have land grants from one group that didn't necessarily match up with the land grants that the government were giving out. And so now the issue is, well, do those previous land grants still stand? And that's a big issue. And so I think that in terms of internal displacement, I really see the diaspora having a role there, whether it's the donation of land that people have in the north and east in order to, facilitate the development of individual families or even large amounts of families. Like I think one thing, at least personally, that we were really frustrated with is the amount of money that somebody overseas can make from selling a plot of land is not that great. And in the reality of the situation, if you are, reasonably comfortable overseas, it would be great to see that kind of initiative from the diaspora saying, we're going to be a little selfless about this and really think about the displacement that's happening in the north and east and really question whether we would benefit from selling that land or working with some sort of microfinancing program or local organization to use that land to help with the internal displacement that's happening.
That's a really great question, and something I think hopefully we can explore on CrossRoads at a greater length of that question of how does the diaspora connect through land with the homeland.
Exactly.
Vinosha, to encourage or at least plant the seed of youth, whether in university, high school, or even working now, to revisit in the spring or summer, what advice would you give in terms of A, what to do, and B, the value of going and spending extended period of time and not as a vacation?
So I think the first thing is to recognize the value of the network within the diaspora. People have gone. Individuals such as ourselves exist everywhere, and it's not always the same thing, but not trying to recreate the wheel, but looking for those networks of people, because I think the biggest value we found was finding individuals that kind of paved the way for us to get to these small local organizations that maybe you wouldn't have heard of if you were looking on a website or kind of like a bigger national program. But if connecting through that network was one of the key things that made our trip so valuable in getting to those people. And there are a few key organizations that you can look to do that. So I would suggest starting there and looking for people within the network that you can go through. And then second, I think going to Sri Lanka is important because if we don't go, who goes? And at the end of the day, the diaspora here is so strong and so diverse. People in Sri Lanka have heard of Scarborough at length, of the mini Sri Lanka that exists in Canada. And if we're not, making a movement to return back and just to inform ourselves, it's not on everyone's back to go and change the world and fix everyone's problems, but to have an informed opinion and to go about your life, not being ignorant of issues that are so close to home for all of us, however many generations have been outside of Sri Lanka. Being Sri Lankan is a part of who you are.
Would you go again?
I would definitely go again, given the opportunity. And obviously there are the classic excuses, being in school, as I am working, as I hope to be in the summer as well. But when the opportunity arises and this kind of attraction to volunteering in Africa or overseas or those places, it is romanticized and it is attractive. And at the end of the day, if I'm appealing to a bit more of a selfish view, having a volunteer placement on your resume looks great. Going somewhere and doing something good for someone other than yourself is something good to do in life, and it enhances a lot of skills as well in terms of like teamwork and leadership and communication.
On that point you just raised, and that's our final question, did you feel a spiritual connection at all during the trip, and however you interpret that?
Take that one,
yeah, like I think that, so the first time we went, we definitely felt at home in Jaffna. We had spent a few days in Colombo before going up to the north and east, but when we got to Jaffna, we just had this sense of feeling at home. And the second summer I went, I think that I made some really great friendships, and I developed some really great relationships to the land and to the people and to the issues. At the end of the day, for all of its complications and problems, Sri Lanka is a diverse, beautiful country, and it's a country where people care about certain issues in a way that maybe we don't here. And I think that people engage with sort of the purpose and meaning of life in a different way, and I felt like I connected really well to that. And I had a hard time leaving when I left. I think that I had really enjoyed my experience there and the work I got to do, but I also did develop that connection. Like I remember, I think on the second last day before I left, I went to visit Pilayar Temple in Colombo. That was actually around the corner from where I was staying, but I didn't realize at the time. And it was a really deep connection to the place I was in and the history. I think that like being there for a long period of time, you really get an understanding of the history of the country and your role in that history. So I completely think that like going back and developing that connection was really meaningful and has shaped a lot of the work I've done since I've come back.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this segment. But thank you, Vinosha and Darshan, for making time. Dear viewers, please join us after this break, where we'll be discussing Tamil health awareness, specifically prostate cancer awareness. Welcome back, dear viewers. We are now joined with Sujani Sivanantaraja, Kajant Nityanandan, and Kasturi Paramalingam. They are members of the Tamil Health Association and are here to help spread awareness about the importance of men's health, with particular focus on prostate cancer awareness, testicular cancer, mental health, and so on. Welcome, Sujani, Kajant, and Kasturi.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for making the time. So, a lot of us have been seeing mustaches pop up on our Facebook friends' photos, and hopefully the guys. So what is it about?
Okay, so Kajant has been taking the lead on the November campaign. We titled it the Misa campaign, just to give it a sort of a Tamil touch to it. And so he's been taking the lead on creating that whole awareness and getting the team together. So I'll get him to start on what it is.
Sure. November actually started off by just a bunch of friends in Australia just getting together, trying to bring out the tradition, actually, the fashion trend of mustache. It seems to be
bring it back.
Exactly, bring it back, right, in style. So they just got together and they just grew it for a month and then just tried it out, and they actually had fun with it. So they realized, you know what, there's actually a real entertainment factor to it, but they can actually coin that to something good, which is Movember. So they started off the following year, and they actually came up with, they realized that well, there's not much actually attention to men's health in general, and men in general. We think we're superior and sort of invincible, and so we don't really take care of our health. In fact, and that's the major concern. And they actually realized this is a big issue, and they brought it out through prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and now they're more focused on mental health of men itself. So Movember started off earlier. It's about 5 years old, 5-6 years old, and in the last year alone, they had 1.1 million men across the globe actually join hands and raise awareness for men's health. So every November of each year, for 30 days, they pledge to grow a mustache and just get their family members to family and friends to raise funds and bring out awareness and actually go get themselves checked out and bring more conversations about prostate cancer and testicular and mental health.
Prostate cancer in particular is actually close to my heart. I lost my father to prostate cancer, and one of the reasons was the lack of early detection. Can you tell, for the benefit of our viewers, why is that important and how it's done?
Yeah, definitely. Like, we thought in our Tamil community, obviously, it's hard to reach out to the parents at this time, and so we tried to get the youth to enroll in the mustache campaign, and so we're hoping that the younger youth generation will sort of walk into their house and have this mustache for a month. And so people like Kajant who have a whole full shave for the entire year, uncles, fathers, everyone sees him with a mustache, they're going to ask, what are you doing with that mustache, right? And so we're hoping with this, where we can generate that conversation and we can tell men in our family to say, hey, you know, this is the reason I'm growing it. Early detection is key, screening is key. Pull out a few stats, pull out a few facts, and sort of give that cue for early detection, right? And so when next year comes around, or even when they go to visit the doctor sometime over the year, maybe that like mustache cue will come into their mind and they will be more sort of active on their health instead of being sort of passive and just going to the doctor when they feel sick. So we're hoping to push our community to sort of regularly get checked up, regularly do the screening. And so there's I think a 1 annual checkup that you should do for prostate cancer over the age of 50. So we're hoping
they've reduced it to 45.
45,
now.
okay.
Correct, yes. Yeah.
So we're hoping to have that more and more prominent in our community now. And so we're hoping like men like you guys can push that, and also it's also Mo sisters. So they call them Mo bros and Mo sisters. And so the women in the families are supposed to encourage men in their families to sort of grow the mustache, create that awareness, and also hopefully we're going to see more and more men pull out these mustache every year. And we're sort of going to do a small survey to see how many men actually had conversations with their families with this year's run. And so I think we have about 25 men in the Tamil community registered under the Tamil Health Network. And we raised about $500 for cancer research globally. And do you have anything else to add on that note?
Well, yeah, just to add on top of that, it's not really about raising funds or even just growing a nice mustache. You can call the mise, but it's more about creating conversations and actually getting your family members to actually go get checked out. That's the most important thing. Acting on it is more important than just growing the mustache silently or even not registering. It doesn't matter if you register or not. It's just the fact that you wear the mustache to actually bring that conversation up, that elevator convo, whatever it is that needs to actually bring that convo.
On the topic of men's health, and something I've noticed within my family and even myself is that, and I think this is a wider problem in the Tamil community, a lot of men are either shy or they have a false sense of bravado in that they don't want to see a doctor. Everything's fine with me. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Even though obviously these things are internal things, right? What advice can you give to the mothers, the wives, the sisters, and even the sons and daughters, brothers, of how to push a Tamil male to go get checked, whether it's for testicular or prostate or anything?
It's a great point you brought out there, is that even though men are the ones who wear the mustache, it's actually the women, I think, are the strongest players. They're the behind-the-scene actors, I guess, where they'll force their loved ones, their men in the family, to actually go get checked out. Because, like I might feel a little shy to bring that up to my father, but then if I actually wear this, he might actually ask me, why are you wearing this? Or if my sister goes home and then says, you know what, a buddy of mine is wearing the mustache for November, and when was the last time you got checked out? Or my mom myself, right? So it's just the fact that the women are stronger players, I believe, and they're more health conscious and are also vocal about the concerns. So I'm hoping that we are hoping that they will actually bring out those concerns and actually act upon those.
Is it sometimes also you have to force them to to do it?
It could be forcing, it could be convincing. The problem with our society is we're a patriarch society, so it's the males at the top. Even if they have any health issue, I don't think they bring it up, especially if it's something sensitive as something to do with mental health or even prostate cancer. They're not going to approach anyone. So even if they do approach anyone, it's going to more likely be the wife. So if the wife and can take it to the children, because the children are really proactive in health, especially we're more knowledgeable, right? So if the children can take it back to the father, be like, here, prevention is key. For instance, prostate cancer is one of the highly diagnosed cancers in Canada, but if you actually, take the steps to screen yourself, you're reducing the likelihood of that cancer developing, really.
And it's, from my understanding, because having my father gone through it, those of us who are darker skinned are more, in particular African Americans and South Asians, are more particular to prostate cancer because we're not receiving the amount of natural vitamin D that our bodies are ancestrally used to, being in the sun a lot. And that's the best source, as you guys know, of vitamin D. And that's one of the reasons I understood why we are, darker skinned males are more prone to prostate cancer. Coming to the issue of mental health, it's something that's very serious in our community. It has been for a long time, some of it because of the situation back home playing a role here, and also domestic problems. What are some of the stories and problems of mental health with men?
One of the biggest problem is mental health. Like, for instance, depression, it wouldn't take the same form. Whereas women are more, they would withdraw. Men are more likely to show aggressive behavior or riskier behavior. That you wouldn't technically register that as a mental health issue. The male is generally supposed to be more violent. So just being aware of the different types of symptoms of mental health, and also just noticing that your father may be demonstrating some symptoms. I think we have to change that into being more proactive, making sure they get the help they require.
And what are some good tips to create that conversation of depression or mental health issues?
I think, personally, I would think sort of just mentally putting that stigma away, right? Putting that stigma away and creating that conversation with men. It doesn't have to be just the family like you're close to. It could even be your friends. And I personally feel like with sort of experiences I've had, first putting that stigma and that preconceived notion of what mental health is supposed to be like away, and creating that conversation, actually connecting with the person to understand what exactly is a problem, or maybe there isn't a problem, they just need someone to talk to, right? And then we can identify that and then seek the help that you need with that. And so the Tamil Health Association, that's one of the other reasons we started, is we feel that all the services are already established in Canada, and especially in the GTA, there's a lot of great services. And so we want to create that bridge to and minimize that gap between the Tamil community and the health services in Canada. And so hopefully with the research and the health education that we're going to be doing, we hope that that gap becomes none to zero, right? And so with that, and my optimistic view is that the Tamil Health Association needs to not be necessary in the community. So all the barriers have been broken, and so there would be no purpose for Tamil Health Association. And so getting rid of that language barrier, the stigma, the cultural barrier, and just connecting the health services in Canada with our community.
And on that topic of stigma, I think it's fair to say that for a male or even a female sometimes, to go for therapy or counseling is viewed as we don't do that, right? What are your thoughts on that? How do we overcome that, and how do we encourage men to seek counseling or therapy?
Like she said earlier, it's just that we have to get over that stigma of looking down upon someone who has an issue or who has a mental health concern. We should take that and we should turn it into a positive thing and actually get help and work towards actually building a better community of people who are understanding of other issues, and not just put a negative stigma on things and think that you have a mental illness, that means there's some serious issue with you and we should kind of outcast you. It's not supposed to be like that. We're supposed to work together and actually seek help and actually improve, and there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. That's what you have to look at.
What are some of the benefits that a male can see through counseling and therapy for mental health?
I think within the Tamil community, we tend to keep our support circle within our family. We don't go beyond, that larger realm, mainly, for fear of stigma, for fear of judgment. So changing, that thought process that, seeking therapy, it's not condescending, but it's actually, proactive. It's, seeking professional advice versus, just speaking to your family.
And also, is it, I think there's an advantage of not being able to, sometimes we feel we can't tell our family members everything that's on our mind.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you think that males can find that comfort with a counselor or a therapist?
Perhaps if they're willing to, open up to, you never know, if they're willing to open up, just, take the first step, call your doctor, make the appointment, let the doctor make the referral. And from then, take it one step at a time. It's usually a process. You don't, go off with the right mindset, but maybe over the process of seeking care and speaking to a counselor, you come to think in the right mindset, especially if they're not comfortable, speaking at home. They could, maybe open up to a counselor. You never know. Yeah.
And I've also heard with friends, that language barrier, because I'm not sure how many psychologists or counselors we have in the GTA that speak Tamil. And so I don't know if that language barrier is sort of not letting men, the older generation, seek out that help. So hopefully doctors can help find these Tamil speaking psychologists or therapists, whatever the patient needs. And so hopefully through our association we can do that kind of a help too, just to find the Tamil speaking healthcare providers.
In different communities and religions, the church or the mosque plays a role, the synagogue plays a role in counseling. As far as I know, our temples haven't have gone to that extent. I mean, what are some other avenues that our community can develop to provide outlets if we don't have the Tamil-speaking psychotherapist or psychiatrist?
I've seen the study with the Aboriginal population, and so what they had, I'm not sure their priest names, but they had those priests actually come into the section of the hospital that has long-term care. And so hand in hand with the doctor and the Aboriginal priest, they would speak to the patients to get them to be more compliant with their treatments, because they felt that with the healthcare providers, they were sort of like a third person to the patient if they weren't comfortable with the language or the culture. And so coming from the priest, the compliance rate was much more higher with these patients. And so I don't know if we could work something out like that within our community, sort of have Tamil-speaking healthcare providers or priests, if that's who you're comfortable with, or whatever your personal preference is and what our population feels is someone that they trust more, sort of have that work hand in hand with our healthcare and hopefully make our compliance rate with treatments and screening much higher. And so I was working with the women's hospital in downtown, and it was a joint study with St. Michael's, and what they had was for women screening, women's cancer screening for cervical cancer, and they had funding to develop a whole program to have presentations in Tamil, as well as have Tamil-speaking volunteers take females to their appointments for cervical cancer, and as well as be there as a social support group. So I thought that was amazing because it was all Tamil focused. So first step of that program was...
Where was this?
It was in the women's hospital downtown.
Downtown,
yeah.
okay.
And so we would go and do these presentations in different centers. So it was not only in the hospital itself, and it wasn't only Tamil. So Tamil was one of the languages. And so first they would come to our presentation, and we delivered a presentation on breast cancer and cervical cancer in Tamil. And then they could sign up for cervical cancer screening with us, or they could go and do it themselves. And then after that, if they needed a social support circle to speak about their diagnosis, then we also gave that in Tamil as well.
Okay, that's terrific. Thank you guys for taking the time and coming on and spreading much needed awareness about men's health. Dear viewers, as our community plants deeper roots in Canada, we create and recreate our Tamil Canadian society. It is important that we better and further understand our past, present, and future. I hope today's show helped shed some light on that. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Parthi Kandavo. Have a good week.
தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.